What is happening, everybody? Welcome to another MLB Live Before Lock, and very, very exciting show because it's myself and Matt, and we've got a 13-game slate here. We've got a ton of spots to talk about. We got stacks to hit on. We've got pitchers, and of course, you guys' questions to answer as well. So if you're in our Discord channel, at me over the course of the show so I could see any questions you guys might have, and then any super chats, we'll be looking out for those as well. As you're watching the show, do us a big favor. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, help support us a whole bunch. Our sponsor today is Sleeper. They have a free square, Matt. Free square over at Sleeper, over under 0.5 strikeouts for Jordan Montgomery. So you guys sign up at Sleeper using the link we have below. Deposit bonus up to $500. That's a great way to build your bankroll. So is playing over 0.5 strikeouts for Jordan Montgomery. So take advantage of those offers over at Sleeper, the sponsor of our show today. And Jack Stakemi already saying 12 games today, not 13. Listen, counting isn't always my strong suit. I looked at the schedule. I was like, this looks like 13 to me. Ended up being 12. You know what I think actually happened? I was looking at how many games there were earlier in the day, and one of the games already underway. That's the reality of it. Or we could just say I can't count to 13. That's also a possibility. How are you doing today, Matt?
I am good. Probably not quite as good as Jack Flaherty, who just struck out his 14th Tiger through 6 2/3. He's getting pulled. So as you said before, definitely revenge in his hurt today. Kind of happy this game wasn't on the slate. Otherwise, it'd be broken.
Yeah, I don't know how much of, I mean, who knows what his price point would have been or anything like that. But I don't know. I would have gotten to a ton of Jack Flaherty, who just put up 6 2/3 innings with 14 strikeouts, just one walk, probably the best start of his entire career. I would be curious to actually look at the velocity numbers for this start, and not that it's going to tell us anything for the future, but was he dialing it up and rearing back to throw a little bit harder against his former team? Maybe, or maybe it's just a coincidence. But if I look at the velocity numbers and I see there was an uptick, it's like the hardest he's thrown the entire season, then I might come to the conclusion that, like, yeah, he was trying to throw a little bit harder facing his former team. It's not an impossibility because, yeah, that's a crazy good start for Jack Flaherty. He hasn't had a start like this in like 4 years.
Yeah, I think you might be right. Like, as far as fantasy goes, probably the best start of his career. Striking out over 10 is special. When you get up to like 14, 15, I doubt he's had that before at any point in his career.
And in 6 2/3 innings, like, we're not even talking about going
Right.
through, 8 innings. Because think about it this way. So 6 2/3 innings means he recorded 18, 19. Yeah. So 20 outs. Of the 20 outs, he got 14 of them were strikeouts. So then 14 out of 20, that's 70% of his out. He's 70% of his outs reported via strikeout. That's some crazy stuff.
Whenever you're live for 20, which Kerry Wood did like years ago, it got definitely the benefit of some calls. You're having an insanely special day. And he got taken out because his pitch count was rising, but he was live for 20, had the pitch count not been an issue.
He's like, for if they would have just kept him in and be like, hey, dude, go throw until your arm falls off, he could have broken the record. He could have had more than that because he still had. Yeah, he could have still pitched 2 more. Yeah, so if he would have gotten all the remaining outs be strikeouts, not that it would have been likely, but possibility.
Man, that just shows you how hard it is to get 20. That even Flaherty today, like, would have needed to get basically every other out via strikeout to get there.
Yeah, but hell of an outing for him. Hell of an outing for him there. I see Malakar said that he had him in his lineup as well as Green, but he didn't get it in time. If it makes you feel better, Malakar, I'm sure in the showdown he was like 70% owned or something.
Yeah, I would say if that were a main slate and you played both of them and forgot to set it in, that'd be a real setback. But on a showdown, yeah, I mean, both those guys were probably in the majority of people's lineups.
Actually, Riley Green homered. So yeah, Malakar, you might have lost out there by not submitting that lineup. But you could take solace in the fact that you built a good lineup at least, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's something for you. On the right track there, Malakar. So maybe you could carry that over and have a big slate for today, which Matt and myself are about to be breaking down here, and lots of pitchers for us to go through. And one thing that is interesting is they still on DraftKings really, really spread out the pricing here. So if we look at the pay-up pitching, even with all these games on the slate, Matt, we only have 3 pitchers that are $9K or more expensive. Spencer Turnbull, who's picking up almost no ownership. Then we've got Reynaldo Lopez, who's pitching against Seattle. So $9,500. Reynaldo Lopez is 18% owned. Then we've got Freddy Peralta at 30% ownership on the high end. There are, let's see, 4 pitchers on the slate that are projected for north of 20% ownership and 6 pitchers overall with north of 15% projected ownership. But let's start by talking about, what do you want to do with Freddy Peralta? 30% owned. Start against the Tampa Bay Rays, who somehow got swept by the Chicago White Sox the other day. They've been all kinds of disappointing to open up the season. Freddy Peralta has been excellent so far this year. He's one of the betting favorites to win the National League Cy Young. Relative to his ownership, Freddy Peralta, I think we could feel pretty good that he's a cash game option. For tournaments, though, do you think the 30% ownership is too high, too low, or just about right?
I think it's just about right. You look at the other options on this slate, there are some other good pitchers, but just go to what you said about Reynaldo Lopez. I mean, he's been good this year and the matchup's good, but he's far from a sure thing. Freddy Peralta is the closest thing to a sure thing we have. Tampa isn't the best matchup in the world. They're not Oakland or the White Sox, but they've been bad this year. Again, no Brandon Lau, no Josh Lowe, certainly no Wander Franco. That's 3 of their best hitters from last year. Rosarena started out the season awful. So Peralta isn't like a must play for me. I still have respect for this Tampa offense, but I see no issues with his ownership. And if I were spending up, he'd be my preferred option. How about you?
Yeah, so looking at the lineups that I have built here, and I mean, it's going to depend what we're considering Luis Castillo as a pay up option or not, because I get a good chunk of him as well. But if we're talking about the guys who are, like the 9K or above, which is the price range I gave you there, he's the guy I get to the most of by just a massive difference between him and everybody else. So if you do want to get to one of these guys, Freddy Peralta is the guy. And also, as per your assessment about you think the ownership is just about right, of the top 150 lineups that I got to running everything through the Sims, I'm like almost right in line with the field on Freddy Peralta. And I see same deal with the Sims run that Jordan did here. He's also got himself to 31% of Freddy Peralta and what he's screen sharing here. So yeah, I think Freddy Peralta, the ownership just about right. On a slate that's this size, it's kind of hard to have any one of these pay up options in like an insane amount of lineups where you'd be way overweight. Somebody's like 30% on, but Freddy Peralta, certainly a good option. You guys should be playing him in cash games. I think he makes sense in tournaments as well. I'm just not going to be all that much different than the ownership on him. As far as Reynaldo Lopez goes, he's got this matchup against the Mariners that you and I have had so many back and forths about this year. And to me, the nearly 20% ownership on Reynaldo Lopez, it's too high, because going forward, I don't buy into Reynaldo Lopez being a top end of the rotation sort of guy. He's got this matchup against the Mariners, who are striking out a ton this year. The pitching matchup between Bryce Miller and Max Fried was ridiculous yesterday. I'm fairly sure they went into, what was it, the 7th inning? Max Fried had a perfect game. Bryce Miller had a no-hitter going. So that was totally ridiculous to watch. That game flew by because nobody was getting on base. You're like 45 minutes into the game and they're in the 7th inning in that one already. So I understand that because of the strikeout upside, people are going are getting to Reynaldo Lopez, but he's not somebody I'm really dying to play at $9,500 at chalk.
Yeah, I'll take that a step further. He's not someone I'll play at that ownership. Again, I'm playing minimal lineup, so I can just cross him out. If I were playing 150, I would not be over the field here. I'd be under. It's a good strikeout matchup for sure, but you're paying premium pricing for him. He's still an unknown. We've seen him have really good stretches in the past. Like, this is one where I know he's not getting as much ownership as Fried last night, but I'd have much more interest in like going to a Seattle stack tonight than I did last night, because Lopez is just unknown. He's been good this year, as you mentioned. His last start was against Miami. I think he's got a couple really good starts against Miami. I'm just not about it at that ownership. There's other guys I like more. You can miss me with Reynaldo Lopez at 9,500 getting ownership.
Yeah, Lopez has had pretty favorable matchups this year. He's had one difficult start against the Houston Astros, but the Astros offense has been all kinds of struggling to open up the year. And also the numbers are fantastic on Reynaldo Lopez. So I don't want to down. So like you could only play the matchups that are in front of you. You can't just say like, hey, I want to see Reynaldo Lopez do it in Coors Field or do it against, like the Cincinnati Reds in Cincinnati or whatever. He just has to play to what he's been up against. He's a 0.72 ERA, a 2.72 FIP. But at the same time, too, I don't totally buy into it. His starts have been against the White Sox, the Mets, the Marlins. The one difficult matchup on paper has been the Houston Astros, but I don't know how highly we're rating their offense to this point in the season. I think going forward, they're going to be fine, but they've been just dog shit so far this year. So Lopez a little bit too popular for my personal liking. So let's move into the 8K range. where we have a ton of guys to choose from. There are so many options in the 8K range, Matt. I'll outline the chalk for the audience here. We have Mitch Keller pitching against the A's, 19% owned. Just because going up against Oakland, I'm a little surprised he isn't more popular, just because that's a team that usually draws a ton of ownership against it. But 19% ownership to Mitch Keller. We've got 30% ownership going to Luis Castillo against the Atlanta Braves. We've got 21% ownership going to Logan Webb, 16% ownership going to Sean Manaea. So those are your pitchers in the 8K range that the field is getting to in some kind of amount. Everybody else is like 6%, 3%, kind of off the radar. So of the popular options here, Matt, Keller, Castillo, Logan Webb, Sean Manaea, who's your favorite popular option in the 8K range?
It's easily Castillo, but even I don't love Castillo tonight at this ownership. Like, I can't imagine a pitcher getting this much love against this Atlanta offense. I know that they haven't been great lately, and Castillo is underpriced. I've played him in his past 2 starts in Texas where he was underpriced, and in Coors where he was phenomenal when he was underpriced. He wasn't great in the 3 starts prior to that, though, or in his first 3 starts. This matchup has low ceiling all over it, and the ownership is there. I'll go to a pitcher in a matchup like this when the ownership isn't there, but it's there. So I'm not as high on as Castillo as I normally otherwise would be, but he's still my favorite of this bunch pretty clearly.
It is a lot of ownership. I'm kind of interested to see if this actually ends up being his ownership as we get closer to lock, and then what it actually ends up being, because yeah, the underlying numbers are good for Castillo this year. He's striking out a bunch of guys. Sure, he has the 4.15 ERA, but particularly early on in the season, I think it's really important to look at the underlying numbers. Kind of like yesterday with Zach Crochet, who had a great start against the Minnesota Twins. A little annoying that we only got 77 pitches out of him, Matt, but he was one of the best overall pitchers on the slate, and he ended up being so low owned, Crochet. Like, even in hindsight, where we got good results out of him, but everything being considered, I think Crochet was the best overall option of anything on the slate yesterday when you consider what his production actually ended up being, what his ownership was, his price, and all of that. And the underlying numbers for Castillo are better than the actual ERA. 4.15 ERA, but the 3.31 expected ERA, the 3.22 FIP. His strikeout rate is 28.8%, which is up from his overall career average, which is 26.6%. The one concern you can maybe have with Luis Castillo, he does have a career worst velocity, 95.4 miles per hour. But, you know, in the early part of the season, I'm not going to get too concerned about that. It's still high velocity, and the underlying numbers, as well as the strikeout rate and all that, are still really strong. I'm just personally uncomfortable with the amount of ownership going to Luis Castillo against the Braves. I'm getting to him in the Sims right now, but I'm inclined to do an ROI downgrade to him just because I don't want to have Luis Castillo going up against the Atlanta Braves in like 40% of my lineups.
We see this eye to eye. I'm a big Castillo guy in general. I think he's one of the best pitchers in baseball. Drafted him early in one of my big season-long leagues. He's really good. I play him often in DFS. I also rarely play pitchers against Atlanta. And while they haven't been as Atlanta-like as many would expect, this lineup is still up there with the Dodgers of the world. And he's just so high owned that I'd rather take risks elsewhere.
So with that in mind, if we're looking at these other guys here, relative to ownership, who is the guy you like to get to if you weren't going to be getting to Castillo in a lineup here? You have to pick one guy in the 8K range who isn't Luis Castillo. If we've got ownership concerns, which direction would you be going?
Probably, I guess Barrios would be my next preferred option. And again, I'm not speaking glowingly of it because I don't like it and I'm not really going to this range. But Barrios has been good this year, specifically at home where he's always been a better pitcher. He's coming in under-owned. He's a little more expensive than Castillo, but in a much, much safer matchup. So I think it would be Barrios for me, but I wouldn't fault you for choosing someone else. How about you?
Boy, it's really tough because it's kind of interesting. Like yesterday, we saw Severino pitch fantastically against the Cubs, and Sean Manaea is picking up ownership again against the Cubs. So for whatever reason, people are just picking on the Chicago Cubs offense right now. But if we're considering ownership here, and I'm trying to find someone to be overweight to, Mackenzie Gore's 7% owned against the Texas Rangers, and he's also shown to have a lot of upside this year. So even though Mackenzie Gore is a 400 BABIP against him this year, he still maintained a 3.12 ERA. The reason that he's been able to maintain a good ERA, even with a very high BABIP, is because his strikeout rate is so high this year. He's striking out nearly 30% of the hitters that he's facing. This is a Texas Rangers team that is likely to strike out more against left-handed pitching this year than right-handed pitching. And you also got a pretty cheap price on Mackenzie Gore, $8,100. You know, it's pretty good salary savings, particularly when you consider that this is a slate that, 12 games, you get a lot of cheap hitters that you could put into lineups. It's you don't have to go like too crazy cheap at pitching. You could go up to Freddy Peralta. You could roster somebody like Mackenzie Gore and still be able to like pretty comfortably build out a lineup with that pitching combination. Mackenzie Gore at 7% ownership. He's not somebody I'm going to have in like 30% of lineups, but I do have exposure to him in the teens right now. He's somebody I like being overweight to at really, really low ownership. And I like the strikeout upside for Mackenzie Gore. He's always been somebody I play a good amount in DFS because when he has good starts, it comes from a lot of strikeouts. It's not like he's a guy who pitches to contact and gets lucky in his starts. And he is formerly one of the top pitching prospects in baseball. Just a couple of years ago, he was considered one of the top pitching prospects in baseball. Then he got called up to the big leagues and had like okay, but not great results while the stuff was always really good. Another thing to consider here, fastball velocity last year was 95.1 miles per hour on average for Mackenzie Gore. 97.2 this year. I haven't looked at every single player's fastball velocity gains, but I think he has the biggest gain of any fastball velocity of anybody this year, and that's a pretty promising sign.
Yeah, it is. He reminds me a lot of Andrew Abbott last night. Two very talented lefties in tough matchups that aren't getting a lot of love. Abbott was amazing. Gave up a leadoff homer to Profar and then proceeded to just carve. Ended up with like a 38-point fantasy score. Not saying Gore's going to do that here, but he's got similar upside. And yeah, it's a scary matchup, no doubt about it. But the bottom of this Texas lineup isn't that scary right now. So I can get on board with Gore at low ownership for sure.
Yeah, and it's hard from a standpoint of the pitchers in this price range that I do think are like in good spots are all fairly popular. Like Mitch Keller, although I do think Mitch Keller is probably a little bit more popular just because he's pitching against the Oakland A's. And then we've got Castillo. He himself is really good. He's picking up ownership. Logan Webb is picking up ownership here. Manaea, who's had a solid start to the year, he's picking up ownership. So just in the interest of trying to find like who is not getting ownership that I think is upside here, by default, I kind of land on Mackenzie Gore. As far as the 7K range goes, there's one pitcher that's picking up ownership, and that is Jon Gray. Jon Gray is 23% owned, and this is a misprice on DraftKings. At $7,300 at home against the Washington Nationals, I think that points per dollar, he's the best overall pitcher on the slate.
Yeah, I don't even think it's close. I'm playing two lineups tonight. I'm playing him in both. I don't love the matchup. Washington's pesky, and they're not awful, but I don't mind the matchup. I mean, Washington's still not a good offense. He's just way too cheap. He's also in good form right now. I don't mind eating the chalk here because I'm getting different elsewhere. He's also like the third, fourth highest owned pitcher on the slate, not close to Castillo or Peralta. We see this exactly the same. He is the best pitching option on the slate because of his price tag.
Yeah, he's the pitcher I get to the most of in the Sims. If you run everything on just the default settings we have, you're going to get him in somewhere around half of your lineups or so. I don't have an issue with that. There are some concerns with his underlying numbers, but you don't typically see this big of a difference. So far this year, Jon Gray is a 5.3 expected ERA, but a 2.96 FIP, a 3.32 xFIP. So the FIP numbers see the start of the season pretty favorably for Jon Gray. The expected ERA, not quite as much. The reality is probably somewhere in between, but most importantly, got a guy with $7,300 pitching against the Washington Nationals and isn't all that crazy popular either. Like we said, 23% owned. So I'm not going to say that he's contrarian or anything, but he's another guy who I think could potentially end up just at the end of the slate. You look at it and be like, how is this guy not like $8,800 or something like that? So Jon Gray, 23% owned. I think he should be quite a bit more popular than that. He's pretty clearly my favorite pitcher in the 7K range. Other guys we have in here that do have talent like Cole Reagans, but there's nobody else I really love in the 7K range outside of Jon Gray. Is there somebody that you like outside of him in this pricing range?
No, I think that Cole Ragans looks okay. He's coming off a good start against Toronto. He's got some reverse splits. So while this lineup is scary and they certainly pounded Boylan last night, like he's got upside at 7,800. He's too cheap. So he would be the guy, but I probably won't get there myself.
We got a question in here from Hey, I'm Drew 95. He wants to know, who are the cash game locks today for DraftKings? And yeah, let's go ahead and look at it is kind of hard to figure out like what hitters you want to roster on a slate of this size for a cash game. Although I do think that some of the Minnesota bats like Edward Julian and Trevor Larnach are standing out. As far as the pitching combination, I think there's a couple of different ways you could go. The ones that I am most comfortable with and think present the highest combination of floor and ceiling, with floor being most important for a cash game. I'm going to say that you want to go with Freddy Peralta as well as John Gray. I think that's your combo.
Yeah. Honestly, I think that's fine. I think it's two of those two and Luis Castillo. I know the matchup with Castillo is obviously not good, but in cash games, I don't mind just riding the ownership, especially on a pitcher with like Castillo, who's got so much upside in any spot he's in.
Yeah, it's tough for me on Castillo because oftentimes I just say go with the ownership for cash games, but I don't feel quite as good about that when that ownership is coming against the Atlanta Braves. But then at the
I'm
same
with you.
time, too, it's not like Castillo's ownership is that much different from
That's fair.
Peralta and John Gray. You know, we still got 23% ownership going to John Gray, 30%. Well, I mean, Castillo and Peralta have nearly identical ownership projections, but the slight discount on John Gray isn't enough for me to say that, like, hey, we shouldn't be playing him over there. And then we'll look at the FanDuel pitchers in a second as well. I see Mike K in chat asked FanDuel cash pitchers. Look at the FanDuel side of things right after we make our way through the rest of these DraftKings pitchers. As far as punts go here, Matt, we're looking at these guys in the 6K range: Carrasco, Hunter Brown, Cooper Criswell, Nick Martinez, Alex Wood, Tyler Alexander, Michael Soroka. I don't like any of these guys. I don't think they're necessary. I don't think I have to roster anybody who's cheap below John Gray for today. Do you see it the same way, or is there a cheap punt option that I'm missing out on?
I wouldn't say you're missing out on him, but I see it differently personally. I'm going right back to Hunter Brown here. I know it's not a great matchup, and he's been dog shit this year, but he's still got a 7% chance of being a top two pitcher on tonight's slate, only 2.5% ownership. We know he was god awful in that start against Kansas City 3 starts ago. Then he came back and was decent against Atlanta. Then he got shelled in the first and second innings against Washington, but came back to strike out 6 in the next 3 innings, left that game on a high note. And he's just way better than a $6,800 pitcher. You definitely don't need it tonight. There's a ton of cheap bats, but I like expensive bats, some which are getting some love. So he's a really good way for me to get different in my mind without sacrificing any upside. Again, I know that there's a low floor here, but I'm just going to roll with he's so much better than a $6,800 pitcher, as he's shown many times in the past.
Yeah, so for me, there's guys where if this was a smaller slate and some of these guys were in these matchups at these price points and low ownership, I'd be like, oh, okay, like I'd want to get to them. For today, I just find it to be unnecessary. There's going to be ample value elsewhere. We've got John Gray at $7,300. So nothing that I really feel like I need to be getting to as far as these cheap pitchers go. Einstein did ask us if we have any interest in Yu Darvish for today. So Yu Darvish pitching against the Cincinnati Reds. He does have one of the better leverage scores in the top pitchers tool. He is only projected for 3% ownership at home against the Reds. Let me see. What do I get of Darvish? I mean, he's not like an outright fade for me. I have him in 4% of lineups, though. So he'll be in some of my lineups, but like not a guy that I'm taking some kind of crazy stand on. But Yu Darvish, is he somebody that you have interest in at all, Matt?
Not really. I don't think he's a bad play. I'm a Darvish fan in general, but he doesn't stand out to me one way or the other.
Let me pull up Darvish's numbers here. By the way, Darvish being 37 years old and still chugging along at a high level, because keep in mind, too, he pitched overseas before he came to the U.S. here. He's been, a professional baseball pitcher for like 20 years or something like that at this point. So Yu Darvish is still putting out decent overall numbers here: 4.18 ERA, 3.79 FIP. We have seen a little bit of a dip in his strikeout rate, which has been something that's started to decline incrementally over the last few years. So I do think he's changing a little bit as a pitcher, which makes sense, right? He's 37 years old. He's been a professional pitcher for like 20 years. He's not going to be able to pitch the same way he did when he was younger and had less mileage on him. And I do think that makes him much less interesting from a DFS standpoint. So for reference, Yu Darvish in 2020, his final year with the Cubs, at a 31.3% strikeout rate. Here's his strikeout rate in each subsequent season. 2021, 29.2%, 2022, 25.6%, 2023, 24.5%, and so far in 2024, 21.8%. So he is pitching more to contact at this point in his career. He's not able to generate swing and misses at quite the same rate. And we still do have somewhat of a price tag here on Yu Darvish, with him being, what was it, $8,400. If he lands in a lineup or two as a last man in, which is kind of what's happening to me with the Sims, I'm not going to force him out of those lineups, but I'm not going out of my way to play him either. He's going to be a guy who's in like 5% of my lineups or something.
Makes a lot of sense.
All right, let's look at the FanDuel side of things. And if you guys haven't done it yet, do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you haven't done it already, we'll look at the FanDuel pitchers here. And then Jordan, get ready to build some lineups in the lineup generator, because we'll be doing that right after we look at the FanDuel pitchers. So on the FanDuel side of things, Matt, the ownership is crazy, crazy spread out if you've looked at this. We have the most popular pitcher, and I'm going to refresh this just to make sure it's the most recent number. Yeah. All right. So on the FanDuel side of things, the most popular pitcher, Freddy Peralta, is 17% owned. Then we've got 15% ownership to Mitch Keller, 12% ownership to Luis Castillo, 13% to John Gray, 12% to Sean Manaea. There's no real chalk at FanDuel. So let's look at this a couple of ways. First, if you had to roster one pitcher for a cash game, who would you pick on FanDuel?
Peralta, because he's getting the most ownership and he's the best pitcher on the slate.
Good matchup, too, against the struggling Tampa Bay Rays team. So I agree. I think for FanDuel cash games, Freddy Peralta the guy to go to. And it's never hard to pay all the way up a pitcher on FanDuel either. There's always readily value available that makes it easy to spend up at pitcher. If you're rostering one guy in a tournament, would it be Freddy Peralta, or would you be looking elsewhere?
Oh, man. I don't really feel strongly about either side. I think that if you can get up to Peralta, he's the best pitcher on the slate. But I also don't think he's a must-play in tournaments at that price point. Like that said, a lot of guys are priced up, it seems, on FanDuel, and Peralta's like basically the same price. So I do think he looks the best. I'm going to go back to my boy Hunter Brown, though, right here. 4.5% chance of being the top pitcher, less than 1% ownership. He's got the same top pitcher percentage as Turnbull, Raggins, Javier Assad, and he's really cheap. So give me either Peralta or go all the way down to Brown.
For me, I like John Gray. Still relatively cheap on FanDuel, just like he is on DraftKings, $7,800. So clearly the pricing algorithms on FanDuel and DraftKings just don't like John Gray in this spot against the Washington Nationals, whereas I think it's a pretty good spot against the Washington Nationals. $7,800 for John Gray, also not all that popular. Like we just said, the ownership's really spread out here. So with that in mind, I mean, a 12 to 13% owned John Gray at $7,800 lets you spend up for whatever offenses you like to today. That's the spot I would like to go to for tournaments. As far as if we're going like really, really low owned, I'll agree with you and say that Mackenzie Gore, probably my guy on FanDuel, just like he was at DraftKings, if we're looking for single digit ownership.
Yeah, makes sense. We picked similar guys. I think the reason I just like John Gray more on DraftKings because it's a better price. And I don't think I like the matchup quite as much as you do. It's more just a price thing for me on DK.
Anything else that stands out to you at pitcher here? All right, so let's go ahead and look at the lineup generator then, Jordan. Let's start with DraftKings. We'll build lineups for DraftKings. We're also going to build lineups for FanDuel here in the lineup generator. And tomorrow is the last day of our lineup generator sale. If you guys have not taken advantage of this, you could sign up for the lineup generator using the link we have below in the description box, promo code double. It's already loaded into there. Get access to the lineup generator for $5. Tomorrow is going to be the last day of this sale. You're going to be getting the lineup generator for cheap. Our player projections, our ownership projections, they're also included in the lineup generator. You can see them if you're trying to make swaps for players. If there's somebody you want to take out of a lineup, it also gets you access to our Discord channel. Any of the packages we have at Stochastic, all include Discord access, and all of our packages are listed below. But the one that we have on sale right now, it is this sale that is ending tomorrow on the lineup generator. So if you haven't taken advantage of it yet, now is the time to go ahead and do that. So let's see what we're getting to on DraftKings, and all stack types, Jordan. And just go balance. There's, no real crazy chalk today, 10 billion options to choose from. So let's go balance, see what ends up showing up, and save a handful of lineups. Yeah, clear those lineups from earlier. And then we will see what it is that we're getting to in these lineups. And we'll see how that's going to differ from maybe some of the pitcher exposures we had talked about, some of maybe the hitter exposures, the stack exposures, and right away, a ton of Minnesota Twins, Matt. We are getting the Twins, Kirilloff's in about half our lineups, Jeffers, Carlos Santana, Edward Julian, Carlos Correa, Max Kepler. So before we got the question from Hey, I'm Drew, who asked who should he be playing in cash games, we told him the pitchers we liked. We like John Gray, we like Freddy Peralta, but we also told him that there are some individual Twins hitters that might want to consider rostering in cash games. You see the lineup generator also liking these Twins hitters quite a bit here. Go to the stack exposures really quick, Jordan. And yeah, even on a big slate, the Twins showing up in nearly 3/4 of our lineups. The Giants are in a quarter of them. We got the Dodgers in 20%. We got the Padres in 15%. The Phillies in 10%. The Guardians in 10%. I want to refresh what we're looking at here in the top stacks tool. And yeah, we do have the Twins picking up the most ownership overall, Matt, but considering the size of the slate, it's nothing crazy. Right over 10% ownership. They're in a park upgrade going to Chicago. They also got a great matchup against Michael Soroka, who's just beyond washed at this point, in my opinion. What are you going to be doing with the Minnesota Twins? They're not necessarily my favorite single entry stack, but I do think it's a team that makes a ton of sense for large field tournaments.
Yeah, they're really cheap also. So they make a ton of sense in cash games and in multi-entering tournaments if you're playing 150. I'm not going to play them in like the 250 stuff. They're just getting too much love. There's other teams I like more. I recognize it's a really good spot, but the Twins as like the chalk on this slate is not for me.
Yeah, large field tournaments, like I said, I'm close to even with the field on the Twins individual hitters. No like real stand there, but I think it's warranted that they have the most ownership on the slate. You mentioned they're cheap. They've got a good matchup against Michael Soroka. They're going to be in Chicago. So I think this is, if you guys are playing one lineup and say, like the $15 contest on DraftKings, I do think the Twins are the team that makes the most sense to stack for that sort of contest. Go to the player exposures, Jordan. Yeah, let's look at the pitchers here. So also a lot of Luis Castillo here. Tools really, really like Castillo today. Freddy Peralta also showing up in a bunch of lineups. Keep scrolling down. Yeah, and there's John Gray. Yeah, I think those are, if you're just looking overall like points per dollar, I think that Luis Castillo, John Gray, Freddy Peralta, those are your three best pitchers to be getting to. And then some more contrarian options as well. Sean Manaea showing up in lineups. And then also the Simeon Woods Richardson. He's showing up in some spots as well. He was in 15% of lineups. That's not something I'm getting to in the Sims tools. I am in the lineup generator here. Anything else you're noticing about these lineups, Matt, or any of the player exposures?
Not really. Looks pretty on point.
All right. So let's go and check out some FanDuel lineups and see what it is that we are getting to on FanDuel and how that might differ. Same deal. Yeah. Balance lineups. Let's not lock anything in. Yeah. Save 20 of them. So as far as team exposures go on FanDuel, it is quite a bit different than DraftKings, Matt. We have the Astros projected for 14.4% ownership, the Phillies at 12.2%, and then the Twins are actually more contrarian on FanDuel. Not that like they're not being played or anything like that, but they're 7.7% owned on FanDuel. So you are getting for, a slate of this size, 10% ownership versus 7.7 is, a pretty good difference there. So the Minnesota Twins, they actually are a team I would like being overweight to on FanDuel, whereas DraftKings I think is a little bit more appropriately owned. Once again, though, I think the Twins are the best team to get to on FanDuel, and a good way to get off of all that ownership going to Houston and Philly. I am seeing as well the lineup generator is getting us a lot of Houston and Philly, but all things being considered, Twins are my favorite stack on both sides.
That's fair. They are not for me. And again, I'm not playing Minnesota as chalk like this. I think their ownership, especially on the top of the lineup, is going to be even higher, even more concentrated in the higher dollar stuff. There's other teams I like significantly more. on DraftKings, like Houston, who isn't getting nearly the love as Minnesota. I know they've been very disappointing. They've cost me a ton of money recently, but they got going in that Mexico City series. They face Carlos Carrasco tonight, who I've mentioned plenty of times. I really like picking on. They just sent Jose Abreu down to the minors to work on his timing and called up Joey Laperfido, leading the minor leagues in home runs. Unfortunately, he's not in the player pool, but adds a nice boost to this lineup. And it's play against Carlos Carrasco. They're expensive. So while individually they'll get ownership, I don't think they'll get as much as a full stack. And I like them quite a bit here, more than a team like Minnesota, who's just easier to roster.
Yeah, we got a question. Jake, who was it? Cosmo said, are they going to add Joey Laperfido to the player pool? I mean, considering the slate starts in an hour and a half, it's a no at this point. Usually when they add a player to the player pool, you'll get an email sent out like around noon or something like that. It's too late at this point.
No chance at this point.
Yeah, and then Jake DeWitt says no 2K Laperfido on DK. Yeah, he would have been 2K and a nice little punt option to get to, but he is not. So he is one player that we aren't going to have to consider from the Astros. One thing that would be really annoying is that if you were stacking up the Astros and like he's the guy who ends up being the nuts and you just don't have him as an option to get to.
Fully prepared for that to happen to me tonight.
He is in the FanDuel player pool at the min price at 2K, but he's not on DraftKings. He is on FanDuel.
That might be why Houston's picking up more ownership on FanDuel because of that cheap price point. I'm sure he's one of the highest guys. And as to your first point, I am fully prepared for that to happen to me tonight, where I stack the Astros. They score 7 runs, all on a Laperfido grand slam and 3-run homer.
Yeah, Laperfido goes 3 for 4, 2 homers, 6 RBIs, and scores 0 DraftKings fantasy points. He'll be scoring fantasy points over on FanDuel unless he, strikes out in all his at-bats or something, which, maybe it's contagious, and that's what's going to happen to all Astros hitters. Gets called up, and that ends up happening to him. I'm curious to see if we're getting Laperfido in lineups here. Let's see. Yeah, I'm not seeing him show up very much in the FanDuel lineups. But if you scroll to the top, we are getting him. Who are we getting to? Yordan Alvarez, Kyle Tucker, Jose Altuve. Those are our 3 most rostered hitters from the Astros. Here's something that makes me feel good, Matt. I had said that my favorite pitcher on FanDuel for tournaments was John Gray. And that's what we're getting to in the lineup generator here as well. 40% of a $7,800 John Gray on FanDuel makes me feel even better about my stance that he's the best pitcher to get to on FanDuel. I see Freddy Peralta also showing up in 19% of lineups, and then probably Luis Castillo if you scroll down a little bit more there, Jordan. For pitchers, where are they at? There we go. Yeah, there's Luis Castillo in 14% of lineups. And then, there's Sean Manaea also in 11%. So that's where we're at with some of those FanDuel pitcher exposures. And go back to the top. I'll read off some of the other players that we're getting to. And it was, Jeremy Pena, Trey Turner, Alex Bregman, Jake McCarthy, Alex Kirilloff, JT Realmuto, Max Kepler. So those are some of the players that the lineup generator is getting to the most of for today. And don't forget, if you guys want to sign up for just $5 when you sign up using the link we have below, promo code DOUBLE. Tomorrow's the last day for that sale. So let's start talking about stacks in more of a broad sense, Matt. And are the Houston Astros going to be your single entry team to get to today? You're kind of alluding as if that is the case.
Yeah, I like them quite a bit here. They're not picking up as much ownership on DK. This is a spot I had circled. They had been so putrid going into that Mexico City series. I know they just faced Colorado in that amazing ballpark, but it's still Houston. It's not like this is a bad lineup. We project them as one of the best offenses in baseball going forward. Ownership isn't quite there. A little bit higher than I would like. Keeps picking up during the day. That's mostly to guys like Altuve and Alvarez, and frankly, I can't argue that. They look like 2 of the best hitters on the slate.
Yeah. The Houston Astros. Let me see. What do I have as far as Astros exposure goes? Yeah, I've got they're a team for me. It's not the team I'm getting the most exposure to at the moment, though. If I'm looking at single entry, all right, which way do I want to go? The Twins, I think, are going to be crazy popular in single entry. Fair to say, right? Like, what are we expecting? Something like 20 to 25% ownership for the top Twins hitters?
Yeah, because there are no cheap pitchers that stand out. So a lot of people are going to jam in Peralta and Castillo, Peralta and Gray. Peralta himself, I mean, he's expensive. So he like kind of limits what you can do. And Minnesota is the top stack on the board and cheap. So yeah, I think Minnesota is going to be crazy popular in that stuff.
Yeah, in single entry, they're going to be really popular. Outside of them, is there going to be any stack that picks up ownership for single entry, do you think?
I don't think there's any other stack that I'm worried about now. Like, I think if you're not playing Minnesota, you're going to be pretty much different from everywhere else. So I like basically every other team towards the top. Arizona, they're hard to get to. I do like San Francisco a lot here. Huge ballpark upgrade for them, which can't be understated.
Yeah, I mean, you look at these other spots. We got the Dodgers. They're projected for 5.7% ownership with 9% top stack odds. Your Astros there, 7.3% top stack odds, 7% ownership. The Phillies, 8% top stack odds, 5.6% ownership. I think all three of those teams are very, very good options for cash games. I mean, not for cash games, for single entry tournaments. If I'm picking my team right now, I'm most apt to go to the Philadelphia Phillies against Tyler Anderson. It's also the team that I'm right now getting to the most in large field tournaments. So there is a little bit of a correlation there for me where I think it's a team that's a little bit under-owned for large field tournaments, but even for single entry with all the ownership that's going to the Twins, you had said it before, it's going to make these other teams look like they're going to just end up being under-owned. So Tyler Anderson's a pitcher who has traditionally been a fly ball pitcher and one who also gives up home runs. It's a bad combination. You do see that, though, where some of the pitchers are the best to target for DFS purposes. It's not strictly the fly ball pitchers, because oftentimes fly ball pitchers have really low home run to fly ball rates, whereas you get a guy in Tyler Anderson who combines having a really low ground ball rate with still like a league average home run to fly ball rate. So you look at his numbers overall for the year, he does have a 1.78 ERA, but it's very much luck driven. His underlying numbers 4.52 ERA, 4.87 FIP. Another thing, too, that is standing out to me about Tyler Anderson, his average fastball velocity, 89.7 miles per hour, never a hard thrower, but he's taken even a bigger step back this year, which as a result, he's not generating any strikeouts. He's walking guys. There's a very bad start coming in the near future for Tyler Anderson. I really like picking on him tonight.
Yeah, that's completely fair. They look really, really good in our tools. Slightly better than Houston, even. Similar top stack percentage, slightly lower ownership. They look about the same to me. So I can't argue at all with wanting to go Philly there. The other team that we're kind of just brushing off is the Dodgers because of the matchup with Jordan Montgomery. Like, there's a lot of bad pitchers on this slate. Montgomery is certainly better than Anderson, Carrasco, Soroka. I think it just tells you how good this Dodgers lineup is. They're still second overall in the top stack tool, and the ownership just isn't there. Again, the top of their lineup will always get some love, but if there was ever a spot to like be overweight on the Dodgers in tournaments, it's tonight, knowing that they're facing a good pitcher who could easily have a good game against them.
Yeah, so let's look at some of the other stacks here. And then also, if you guys have any questions, hit us up in Discord, and I could be on the lookout for any of those. I just saw a couple of them that came through. One of them is from Einstein. He wants to know, are the White Sox a team that we're liking for today? So Chicago White Sox, so far we've talked about the other side of the game and the Minnesota Twins going up against Michael Soroka. And I'm sure a lot of people remember the other slate. I did like stacking against the Simeon Woods Richardson because he was projected for like 40% ownership. And I thought that made for a decent leverage stack in that spot. Somehow he's getting another start against the Chicago White Sox. So back-to-back starts for Simeon Woods Richardson against the White Sox. The top stack odds very poor for Chicago, but they are so cheap. They have crazy high top value odds. They have a 16.5% chance being the top value stack on the slate. I like them as one-offs to save some salary with. I don't really think five-man White Sox stacks are really all that necessary for today. Individual one-off hitters, for sure. Full stacks, I don't really need that much salary savings.
I'm with you again. I like the White Sox as one-offs and as mini stacks because they're cheap and Woods Richardson is not good. But Woods Richardson also isn't coming in with the ownership he was on that slate. He's 7K instead of 4K. The leverage isn't there. So I'm with you. I don't need to full stack them, but mini stacks one-offs I'm cool with.
Yeah, let me look through the ownership I'm getting to the White Sox so I could say which hitters it is that I'm actually getting to. Right, filter by Chicago. Yeah, and they're all very, very cheap and low owned, but here are the ones that I actually am getting to a little bit in lineups. Nicky Lopez is a piece to save salary with, and Eloy Jimenez also, who's cheap, only projected for 3% ownership and actually presents power upside. So Eloy Jimenez, I think that he's somebody who also makes sense as a one-off from the Chicago White Sox. So those are a couple of batters that do have interest to me. And then Mr. Cool Cam wants to know, what is our favorite low-owned FanDuel stack? We can do this for both sites here now, Matt, but starting with FanDuel, because that was Mr. Cool Cam's question. If you had to pick one stack to go to on FanDuel, that is, let's see, let's go sub 5% ownership. Is there a sub 5% ownership stack that stands out to you on FanDuel?
So the Giants are right at 5%, and I like them, but I'm going to go completely off the board. And again, I like them more on DraftKings because of the ownership Castillo's getting, but he's still popular on FanDuel, and the Braves are the Braves. So give me the Braves at like no ownership at like around 5%. Give me the Giants with a much likelier chance of succeeding.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the Giants here as well against Cooper Criswell. Also, big park upgrade for the Giants playing in Boston at Fenway Park. There really aren't that many standout low-owned stacks on FanDuel. I do think that if you want to get a little bit different, the spots you would go to on FanDuel are the Minnesota Twins or the Los Angeles Dodgers. They're lesser owned than the Houston Astros and the Philadelphia Phillies, but they're not like crazy low owned. But if you're looking for a team that's like modestly owned, I think the Minnesota Twins are the team you want to be getting to over on FanDuel. For the DraftKings side of things, Matt, is there a sub 5% owned stack you like on DK?
I mean, it's definitely Atlanta, and I'm not playing enough lineups to play them, but anytime you can tell me you're getting Atlanta at 0.6% ownership against what could end up being the most popular pitcher on the slate, I'm in. So again, I'm not playing enough lineups to play them, but I'm not going to be surprised at all if they take down the slate. Castillo was really shaky his first 3 starts, and Atlanta's Atlanta. So I'm going to go off the board and say the Braves.
Let me look at some of these stacks here, and sub 5% owned. Sub 5% owned.
Arizona's probably the easiest one in that range to make a case for.
I do have about double the exposure to the Diamondbacks that the field has. They're going up against Landon Knack, and Knack is an unranked prospect he's like a quadruple A guy. He's probably not a major league pitcher, but he's not quite a minor league pitcher either. So getting called up to the big leagues now at age 26. So far this year, we've only seen him pitch 11 innings. There's not really that much data. In the minor leagues, not really all that much to say about. He was just very mediocre, middle of the road. Projections aren't all that high for him going forward. A guy was expected to have like a mid to high 4s ERA. But just because he has so little experience at the big leagues, he's not generating strikeouts so far this year either, nor is he generating ground balls. So Landon Knack, I do think there's upside in stacking against a complete unknown at pitcher when there isn't offensive. Well, the offense, I should say, that ownership isn't going to the Arizona Diamondbacks. So Arizona, I have 8% exposure to them at 4% ownership. I think that's a pretty good contrarian stack as well.
Yeah, I'm with that. They're also really good. So ownership is not there and they stand out with it.
And then I got a question here from Sick Hemi who wants to know, what is our favorite leverage stack for the slate? I know you mentioned the Atlanta Braves. Is that a leverage stack you really like? Is it just the best of what's available? Is there any particular leverage stack that stands out to you? To keep in mind, here are our popular pitchers on DraftKings. They are Freddy Peralta, Luis Castillo, John Gray, Logan Webb, Reynaldo Lopez, Mitch Keller, Sean Manaea. Those are the pitchers that you'd be stacking against for leverage purposes. Any of those offenses you're really that interested in for leverage purposes?
The two that stand out that if I were playing 150, I'd probably be over the field on is Atlanta and Tampa. You're just playing against the ownership of the opposing pitchers, both of whom are very, very good. but especially in the case of Atlanta, elite offense. Tampa, I mean, they've been chalky on a bunch of recent slates. While that's probably been undeserved, it shows you that this offense at least has upside. So it would be Tampa, it would be Atlanta for me, knowing that these teams don't have high likelihoods of success. Matter of fact, it's very low, but they also have a lot of power in their lineup. So on the days that Peralta or Castillo are off, they can hit home runs, and they're facing bullpens, especially in the case of Tampa, that I'm certainly not afraid of.
I don't really find any leverage stacks necessary for today. The leverage stacks that I like, and we bring this up on this show all the time, is when you get pitchers who are not actually good real life pitchers that are picking up a lot of ownership. That tends to not happen on slates of this size. If I had to
I'm
pick
with
one,
that.
I'll agree with you and go to the Braves against Luis Castillo, because it's the Braves offense, arguably the best offense. I don't think they're the best offense in baseball, but arguably they're the best offense in baseball. They're in the mix. And with that in mind, yeah, you got a pitcher going up against a potent Braves offense. Braves aren't picking up ownership. Luis Castillo is, but it's not a spot I'm really getting to. I have very minimal exposure to the Braves, so it's hard for me to recommend them. I'd rather just go to teams that are just not all that popular in large field tournaments, like the Diamondbacks, than trying to stack against like Freddy Peralta or something like that.
Same. It's not how I play MLB DFS. I just think there's merit in going there if that's how you want to play it, knowing that it's not likely to work out. But when it does, you're killing a lot of the field. And it's not like they're the White Sox. Like when Tampa and especially Atlanta go off, they hit home runs.
Any other offenses on this slate that are of interest to you or you find to be important that we haven't talked about? And if not, we could do our dong picks for the day before we head out for the night.
Yeah, one that we haven't talked about that I don't like, which just makes our love for John Gray even better. Washington, the third highest owned offense on the slate on DraftKings. Like, no thank you there.
Let me refresh. Are they really the third highest owned offense now?
Yup.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. They are. We've got now the most popular offense that remains the Minnesota Twins. Second most popular offense, Milwaukee Brewers. Third most popular offense, yeah, Washington Nationals against John Gray. So to the point you made before, I think that we're looking at John Gray as a leverage pitcher now. Not only as somebody who's not all, because John Gray's ownership has gone down in our last ownership update as well. Not like crazy down, but he's gotten closer to 20%. He's dropped by a couple percentage points. So yeah, we're getting leveraged by playing John Gray against a surprisingly chalky Washington Nationals stack. Interesting.
All about it. Makes me like him just that much more.
Yeah. Interesting that John Gray coming. I didn't expect that at all. I thought as we got closer to lock, John Gray would get more popular. I didn't expect that he would get less popular and the Nationals would become chalky, but
same.
Here we are. So that aside, Matt, before we finish out the show, and also people in YouTube, let us know who is your home run pick of the day. But Matt, dong, what's the hot dong pick of the day?
I'm going to go Jung-Ho Lee leading off for the Giants with a homer.
All right. Jung-Ho Lee. I can't believe I went with Vladimir Guerrero Jr. yesterday against who was it? Bolin or whatever the hell that guy's name was. And it ended up being Justin Turner. It's 2 home runs. Nobody played him at first base because anybody who had a Blue Jays stack, it was Vlad who was the first baseman. So I'm looking at my lineup. It's like, oh, cool. Blue Jays are hitting home runs. This must be going really good for me. And it was fine. Like I did decently on yesterday's slate, but considering the amount of Blue Jays stacks I had, I thought I would be crushing, but no, it was just Justin Turner hit the home runs instead of Vlad, which was super annoying for yesterday. My home run pick, I'm going with Fernando Tatis. He's actually my most rostered one-off on the entire slate. He's only projected for 5% ownership. I've got Tatis in about a quarter of my lineups right now. So that's going to be my dong pick. I'm going with Fernando Tatis. From chat, we've got Jason Swing going with Julian today. Andre B's got Kyle Tucker. Michael Roundtree's got Gary Sanchez. Nice one, Gary. Mark P, Eloy Jimenez. We've got Malukar's going with Teoscar Hernandez. I think Malukar says Teoscar Hernandez 5 times a week. I could be wrong on that, but I think he really likes Teoscar Hernandez. Sotex has got Will Smith. Flim Flam Man is going Matt Olson to get off the shine. Yeah, rough start to the season for Matt Olson. He's going to turn it around sooner rather than later for sure, though. Casey Leatherwood's going Nick Castellanos. Has there been like a bad global event that I missed that's going to lead to a Nick Castellanos home run? Perhaps. Bryce Harper from Aaron Hines. Then, of course, Junior Whopper going Bryce Harper with 2 homers. Then we got BD going Francisco Lindor with 2 homers. We've got Arcafels has got Jorge Soler. Clint Wood's going to Adolis Garcia. Malucar is also going Mike Trout as a second home run pick. Ed Choi's got Reese Hoskins there. Then Jeremiah Johnson's got a double dong day for Jose Ramirez. He's got Jose Ramirez double donging it up tonight. So that is going to do it for us, guys. Thank you very much for watching. If you're not done yet, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Right after this, we're going to have NBA Live Before Lock, and there's going to be the post-lock show, Josh and myself hanging out over in playback. So go check that out as well after the slate locks if you want to sweat the games with us and hang out and get any kind of analysis if there's any late swaps where players get ruled out after lock or anything like that. But guys, thank you very much for watching. Have a good night. I'll see you on playback in about an hour.